Like I said, this is mostly a brain dump Q&A for people that are interested in what's going on with Bittensor Revolution, which is coming out on October 2nd. That's Monday next week. We've called it Revolution because it's a revolution for Bittensor in many ways, because the Opentensor Foundation, which has for a very long time been the nanny to Bittensor, has been the primary development organization and the only ones that have access to controlling the mechanisms on Bittensor. That's changing. And what we mean by that is that the hierarchy of power is changing with Bittensor Revolution. So it's no doubt a revolution. Each and every single one of you now has the opportunity to enter into the same position that the Opentensor Foundation has been situating themselves up until this point. That means creating the incentives that run this computer that we're co-running. It's also a revolution in computation, because Bittensor Revolution opens up the ability for people to very easily, developers and yourselves, to very easily write incentive mechanisms with the language of human consensus and using tau as the electricity for this co-machine that runs Bittensor. There you go. There's somebody that needs to be muted. It's a revolution in computation. Perhaps there are many other projects out there that have tried to create incentive mechanisms for digital commodities, but we're the first to ever write a language to write them in general. I think this is the best framework for thinking about Bittensor as it stands today, and especially, well, as it will stand on Monday. We've been going through a tremendous amount of innovation in the background to make this launch successful and open up these functionalities to everyone, so everyone can have access to this computer. It's not just a revolution in computation, though. It's a revolution in terms of governance for the Bittensor ecosystem. Emission schedules are now under the purview of delegates. That means that the members of what I'll speak about later, the root network on Bittensor, have the ability to direct incentive throughout the ecosystem, selecting which mechanisms we consider to be valuable. That means then that goes for the Opentensor Foundation subnet 1 as well. If we consider that mechanism or that compartment of our computer to be non-valuable, we can push that into non-existence, and we hope that we get that pushback to drive us to innovate in what we're doing. So it's revolution in governance, a revolution in computation. It's certainly a revolution in what Bittensor has been for the last 2.5 years. I'm so happy that a number of people that have been here since the beginning are still in this Discord channel right now listening to this presentation, just like old times. So, but let's get down to what exactly Bittensor Revolution is about. This presentation is meant to answer a few questions. What are subnets? How do they work? How does mining and validation, how does that change going forward? How do people interact with the consensus mechanism on Bittensor Revolution? And then we'll finally answer some questions and answering questions for you guys. What are subnets? Subnets are Oh yeah, that's right. I agree. Stefan, could you find that individual and mute them for life, just so they can't speak even in IRL. So what are subnets? Subnets are self-contained incentive mechanisms which run on the Bittensor blockchain. Subnet 1, many of you are familiar with, is a subnet, and subnet 11 is a subnet. And what that means is it is it's an environment through which tau is mined under the reward landscape constructed by validators. It's what miners plug into. The thing that's changed now is that the owners of these subnets are no longer just the foundation, but can be various individuals or groups. So all subnets now have an owner. What's also changed is the way in which the Bittensor code base works. Before Bittensor Revolution, the specifics of the incentive mechanism, the miners and validator interaction, the protocol was written directly into Opentensor / Bittensor, the GitHub repository. This has been pulled out. And instead, the way in which miners and validators interact through the protocol can now be written by the owners of the subnet repositories that people run. Everything stays the same. So everybody who's a miner will be familiar with the structure here. Miners can register into subnets. There'll be a recycle registration as well as a power operation to enter these subnets. The difference is that instead of entering solely subnet 1 style mechanisms, there'll be a variety. I'll talk about what we're seeing already being created as of today. This is a visualization of what the subnets will look like. Here we got 9, and I've drawn 9 because there'll be 9 subnets on launch. The subnets each take a position on the chain. They have 256 UIDs to begin. This will be changed later on. Each of them has a net UID, which is a specific unique identifier, just like subnet 1, but going up to, in this case, 9. The miner and validator interaction is defined by the repositories that subnet creators write. Subnets can be registered by anyone, and the registration process is performed by locking tau. So unlike the POW registration or the recycle registration, in order to attain a subnet slot in Bittensor's Revolution branch, you simply need to lock tau for the duration of the subnet's existence. This amount that needs to be locked is adaptive in the demand for subnets. So as the rate of subnet registration increases, I'll go through how that operation works, but the amount increases a little bit like a Dutch auction. When the subnet is deregistered, which can happen through a competitive process with other subnets. Once the subnet is deregistered, your tau is returned, so nothing is lost. And individuals who own those subnets will acquire 18% of the emissions that are dropped through that subnet. So it's in the interest of subnet creators to attract the delegates, which I'll speak about later, and their assessment of how those subnets work. Owners act as full network administrators, so you have full permission to act to make pseudo calls. A list of the specific pseudo calls will be laid out later, and we intend to sort of roll them out slowly so that we understand the mechanics and the mechanism of those hyperparameter changes going forward. So there's competition for subnet positions. And the reason why we require this competition is that we need to ensure that the chain does not get bloated. So we're starting with 9. We'll likely go up to 32 or 64 in the year, depending on how much consensus there is around which subnets are performing on Bittensor, and if those subnets reach a certain consensus and equilibrium, if they mature properly, will likely increase. And this will be something that is pushed through the Senate. So the Senate will be able to decide whether or not we move up in the number of subnets. Subnet 11 will exist. A lot of people are asking about this. Subnet 11 will still exist, even though there's 9 allowed. But it's very possible that we will deregister Subnet 11 going forward. Registration lockups. I think many people have been asking questions about this. Like classic miner registration, the amount of tau required to create a subnet is determined by supply and demand. Initially, the lock cost is $2,500. So if that's too high for most people, note that it draws down over time as if there's no individuals registering subnets into Bittensor. So the initial rate is $2,500. When a new subnet is registered, the rate doubles, and then as blocks progress, the lock cost falls linearly over time. So akin to a 2-week halving. I'll give you an example. In this image, you can see that at time 0 is the 2,500 lock cost. If there's no registrations in the first week, that lock cost will drop until a subnet registration occurs. That's that green dot. At which point it doubles, and then recedes again. So in this, with this mechanism, we can reach an equilibrium for the demand for subnets based on the lock cost. So we'll see this play out over the next couple weeks. And it'll be important for people like Mog Machine and Taostats to build front ends so that people can see this behavior. And I'm speaking to him about that already. Registration lock. Another huge innovation in the way Bittensor is being run is the root network. The root network is the meta subnet through which emissions are distributed across the subnets. So this is it runs a Yuma consensus, a pared down version of Yuma consensus with a weight matrix to produce an emission vector across those subnets. So this is similar to the incentive mechanisms that run in subnets, but it's just an incentive mechanism, or it's a consensus mechanism which runs over top of the subnets themselves. For those familiar, we use Yuma consensus v1. We will be passing out the documentation and explanations of how YC v1 works, similar to the consensus mechanism which ran on the Kusanagi network one and a half years ago. In tandem, the root network acts as a network senate. So the senate has been deprecated and replaced with the root network. So you'll, instead of needing to nominate or elect your keys, if you're part of the root network, you are delegates by fiat from the chain, and then also you are members of the senate if you're in the top 12 keys. So this brings together the root network senate and delegation mechanisms on Bittensor into a single subnet that can determine the emission scores for the entirety of the system. So I'm going to go into how this works a little bit. This is the root network representation. Along the axis here, you can see the subnets visualized. 1, 2, and 3. In practice, there'll be 9. Each of the members of the root network, I have Foundry, Neural Internet, and Opentensor here because they're large delegates, set weights on the subnets based on their preference. And then we apply a consensus mechanism across those weights to determine the emission. The way that it is designed, subnets will need to attract the majority of weights from the delegates on the root network, of which there's 64 slots, before they attain a lion's share of the emission. So that's this process is going to be much more manual than it was in for other subnets, where the weight setting was performed by the validator code itself, and in the update, delegates on the root network will have to set these weights manually. We also updated the command line interface. There's a whole bunch of functionality that has been added to the BT CLI. We would like to push people towards using the help command on the CLI, where they can see the new functionality. All the legacy commands are still there, but it's through the CLI that you can register your subnets. You can perform pseudo operations on subnets, and you can interact with the root network if you're a large-scale delegate. Great. So I'm going to pass these slides out after the presentation. These are some resources that we recommend people look at for this launch, to stay in contact with us regarding how this is going to play out. Recommend reaching out to me and the devs at Opentensor directly if you have any questions, and then also Q&A. So let's get into that. Great. So if you'd like, you can actually speak right into the channel here on Discord. You can raise your hand in the Twitter Spaces.
Okay, I've got a question about the command line interface. What is the version that has register available? Because when I try it, it's saying invalid subcommand.
So it would be root register that you're looking for. So it's btcli root register, and the this is not on master yet. So you should be on the revolution branch. Yeah,
Got
there you
it.
go.
Yep, I'm on the right branch, but I hadn't used root. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Cons, am I understanding correctly that you're basically making like a systematic way that anyone can create a subnet and whether and how much emission it gets is like just determined systemically instead of like a Senate vote? Is that what's happening here?
Exactly. I think that's the primary change in the way that emissions have been distributed. So it's a huge change because the Opentensor Foundation no longer has that control, but is determined by the root network. However, it's not like I can just select the amount of emission that my subnet gets. I need to reach consensus with other delegates on the root network before that emission is distributed.
Crazy. So what Bittensor has been so far is kind of like a unit of this broader, I guess, network of networks.
It's now a network of networks. The root network is like the controller or the electrical plug into the computer that is Bittensor. And this will require a lot of communication between delegates on this system to properly set weights. Plug into the computer that is Bittensor. And this will require a lot of communication between Nick says, when you say there will be 9 subnets at launch, you mean there will be 9 spots available, not 9 active subnets. And that's right. That's exactly right. There won't be 9 subnets available. There will be 9 slots for subnets. So it should take a few weeks for those subnets to enter the network and reach maturity. Fill up that space.
When delegates are trying to reach
that there would be 256 UIDs for each subnet on launch, will subnet 1 immediately be raised to 1024 again? And how is that decided and executed?
Subnet 1 will remain exactly the same on the Monday launch. It does not need to be raised back to 1024. So it'll be the only subnet initially that has 1024 slots. All of the remainder will have 256.
When delegates are trying to reach consensus on, I guess, weighting how much rewards are going to the different subnets, is that consensus weighted by how much stake those delegates have?
Exactly. So it's UMA consensus, just applied at the emission level. It's actually YC1. It's the consensus mechanism that ran in Kusanagi. So there's no bonding system. There's no bonds that accumulate on the root network. So that would be just a redundant placeholder. There's no validator trust because it's not YC2.
Const is subnet 11 for the moment going away, or is it getting reduced to 256 UIDs?
So SN11 is likely going to be deprecated after this launch. We understand that some people are still using it for testing, and that it provides a unique entry point into the tensor that's easier to enter. So up until the moment that there's more diversity in the subnets, we'll keep S11 there. But our aim is to deregister that subnet in the next little while.
Okay, yeah, makes sense given where things are going. Thanks.
Yeah, once there's 9 active mature subnets in Bittensor, we'll likely no longer need S11.
Right.
Mog said, are validators penalized in any way if they do not set weights on S0? Can they validate on SN if they have not set weights for it? Absolutely, yeah. So there's actually a separation between the root network and the ability to validate on the subnet. So you can validate on any subnet you want, and still set weights on the root network in any way you want. Those are disjoint problems. And the reason for this is that we wanted to keep the economic security consistent across all 9 subnets to begin. So state copies across all of them.
It's incredible concept because I always thought that like Bittensor's strong suit is like how the incentive mechanism is used, and now you're taking that and you're giving it pretty much to anyone to do anything with. That's a lot of I guess freedom. Nothing like this exists anywhere else.
There's a lot of freedom, and with this freedom, I think comes responsibility. So we're hoping that. To a large degree, the initial subnet developers really use the power wisely and correctly. Yeah, everyone has the opportunity to become an Opentensor Foundation. We are nesting ourselves, we're situating ourselves underneath the same table as everyone else, so we can be selected into non-existence, and that's good.
Excuse my ignorance. Did you say this is going live on Monday? When is this coming online?
That's right. This is live Monday.
Awesome. Thanks.
And there's 256 UIDs per subnet by default. At a later date, we're going to allow people to increase that amount with a similar lock mechanism. But for now, it's just 256. The number of validators is 64. So we discovered that in practice, there's only about 64 active validators across the network. So in order to increase the ability to scale Bittensor, we've reduced the validator permit to 64 by default. Can you speak to the progress of some of the subnets interested in launching after Revolution live? I would really like those projects to take the floor at some later date. Dr. M has already suggested that he'd be willing to interview some of the developers. I think that'd be a great way to get them some.
I would love to. I would love to get like you guys, the founders, and anyone else close to the team to just speak about Tau and about all of it. That would be amazing.
Yeah. And so what we know to be in development right now is a storage subnet, a MapReduce subnet, a distributed training subnet, as well as a Rash's Bitcoin numerized style prediction market. That's just really the tip of the iceberg, though, from what I've seen. I know that many people are cooking up new structures. And there's a data scraping subnet, that's right. As well as I believe Victor is also launching a subnet, hopefully in the next little while. He's doing something called NicheNet. But I don't want to spoil the surprise. I think those developers might want to present their work directly to the community at a later date. Mog says him and Victor will be covering the subnets on next Teacher Tuesday, which is fantastic. Okay. So Demu from Twitter says, "What happens if the demand is very high to create a subnet? If the first subnet crosses 2,500, the second 5,000, and so on, it will get quite expensive." It really depends on the demand. So the first subnet will cost 2,500. The next will cost 5,000, but then over a 2-week period, that rate decreases like a Dutch auction. That was what I presented in the slides. So it's hard to say what that rate will be. If people are willing to lock up tens of thousands of Tau, at least initially, it will require people that have their ideas to either pair up with other teams that have that economic lock, or wait.
Apologies if you already covered this, but how long does a subnet have to? Does it have some like period of immunity before it, could get kicked off of the 9 available slots if it's not achieving?
Yeah. So like the other mechanisms, there's an immunity period, and the immunity period is 1 week for newly registered subnets. When we get to 9 subnets, that's when the first deregistration will occur, when someone tries to register a subnet after the 9th. And there'll be an active process from those subnet owners, we hope, to advertise what their mechanism is bringing to Bittensor in order to attain weights from core validators. Sorry, root validators. Will validator immunity be increased on Monday to allow migration, or what is the ETA on deregistrations for those who do not update? Validator immunity be increased on Monday to allow migration? I'm not familiar. I'm not actually sure I understand what you mean, Mog.
So
obviously on Monday, it may take some people a little bit of time to get their validators updated, their Bittensor, and get things running again. Normally, you'd have about 13 hours setting weights before you get deregged. I wonder if that would change. I think in Finny, you gave a leeway of 24, 48 hours. It was increased. I was just wondering if it would.
I mean, I would suggest that validators begin the process of migration now, and then just don't set weights with the machines that they're migrating. That won't affect their, if they can just run both, right? You can just run both validators with one not setting weights, make sure that's running, and then turn the original off when we do the migration. But I'll consider what you're suggesting, Mog, regardless. Hey, Stefan, is there anything that I missed with the presentation here that you suggest I speak about?
I guess we put a time to the release. We've put it to 12 noon EST on Monday, so everyone can be ready at their keyboards to make that quick switch.
Yeah, exactly. And we also recommend that if you're mining on subnet 1, right? There's two migrations occurring. There's the move to introduce the root subnetwork and open up subnet registrations, but there's also the code change for subnet 1. So miners need to update their miners with the latest code from Bittensor Revolution. It shouldn't be that difficult. Most of the objects are exactly the same, except that the axon has been changed slightly in the way that you write your miners. So we recommend if you're a hardcore miner that you're starting this process now, because you have only 4 days to update your mining infrastructure. Viva la Revolution. Yes, so we have 12 noon EST on Monday. That's correct. No, actually, apologies. That date is incorrect. According to the announcement, it's actually 2 p.m. EST. So I correct myself. It's 2 p.m. It's not noon EST. It's 2 p.m. EST. We'll be here in the Discord as well as on Twitter during this process, so people can get help from us as we do the migration.
Okay, so comps, both validators and miners have to update for this. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Apologies for your midnight update, Capricious.
And we'll need to re-register for subnet 1. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct. So subnet 1, the only thing that changes for subnet 1 is that the validators will be moving to a new protocol written with Bittensor Evolution, which means that we're using fast API over gRPC. It's an HTTP mechanism. And so if you're running miners that are built with the previous Axon protocol, you won't be able to receive requests from the updated validators. So it's important that you are familiar with the new code base and how to write miners, and that you have updated your specific miner code for that new release. Okay. Wow, this is a very full Discord channel. Heck yeah.
Yeah, this is actually the right way to do this, as in, have the interaction here on Discord and then have brought, pass it out basically to Twitter Space. Works very well.
Yeah.
Also,
Great. Okay, well, if there's no further questions, I think we'll end it here. I'm sure there'll be more that percolate over the next day or so. Please write them here in the Discord. We will also send out another Slido if there's more questions after this call. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Khan. Super exciting updates.
Thanks, Doctor. Okay, ciao.